Montana Territory, 1873. A harsh winter had settled over the small mining town of Silver Creek, blanketing the jagged mountains and wooden storefronts in pristine white. The cold was the kind that turned breath into fog and made men's beards frost over. For 26-year-old Ethan Rawlings, the bitter chill was simply another hardship to endure on a frontier that offered little but struggle and solitude. Ethan dismounted from his chestnut gelding, his leather boots crunching in the snow as he secured the horse to a hitching post outside the general store. His clean-shaven face was weathered beyond his years, with sharp blue eyes that surveyed his surroundings with practiced caution. Despite his youth, he carried himself with the wary posture of a man who'd seen too much violence to believe in anything but self-reliance. A man who lets others close is just giving fate more targets. His father had told him before a gang of cattle rustlers had gunned him down 3 years prior. It was a lesson Ethan had taken to heart, choosing the life of a drifting ranch hand who never stayed in one place long enough to form attachments. What Ethan truly wanted was enough money to buy his own spread someday, a place where he answered to no one. What he needed, though his pride would never let him admit it, was something to fill the emptiness that had settled in his chest like the winter cold. Inside the store, he nodded curtly to the shopkeeper and began gathering supplies. Silver Creek was just another stop, another temporary job at the Crossfire Ranch outside town. By spring, he'd be gone again, just as he planned. 2 pounds of coffee, some salt pork, and whatever ammunition you have for a Winchester, Ethan said, placing coins on the counter. The storekeeper was about to respond when the door burst open, bringing with it a swirl of snow and a young woman whose presence immediately commanded the room. Olivia Kennedy stood in the doorway, her golden hair tumbling from beneath a worn bonnet, her blue dress several seasons out of fashion but meticulously maintained. At 22, her beauty was undeniable. High cheekbones flushed from the cold, determined green eyes, and a graceful poise that somehow persisted despite her evident exhaustion. "Mr. Donovan, I need to speak with you urgently," she said to the shopkeeper, seemingly unaware of Ethan's presence. "It's about my brothers. Those men came back while you were delivering supplies yesterday. They said if we don't vacate the property by week's end, they'll—" Her voice faltered as she noticed Ethan watching her. "Miss Kennedy," the shopkeeper said gently, "perhaps we should discuss this privately." Ethan gathered his purchases, intending to leave them to their conversation, but as he turned toward the door, 3 men entered, rough-looking types with cold eyes and guns worn low on their hips. "Well, if it ain't the Kennedy girl," the tallest one sneered. "Come to beg for more time? Your pa's debts don't disappear just 'cause he got himself killed." Ethan noticed how Olivia's spine straightened, how she lifted her chin despite the fear in her eyes. "Those weren't my father's debts, Mr. Harlow. You forged those papers, and everyone in this town knows it." "Careful, girl," Harlow said, stepping closer. "Accusations like that could leave those little brothers of yours all alone in this world." Something in Ethan shifted, a protective instinct he thought he'd buried along with his family. The lady was just leaving, he heard himself say, moving to stand slightly between Olivia and the 3 men. Harlow's eyes narrowed. "This ain't your business, cowboy." "I'm making it my business," Ethan replied evenly. The standoff lasted only seconds before Harlow spat on the floor. "We'll finish this conversation at your place, Miss Kennedy, with your whole family present." The threat in his voice was unmistakable as the men departed. In the silence that followed, Olivia turned to Ethan, surprise and wariness mingling in her expression. "Thank you, but you shouldn't have done that. Those men are dangerous." "So am I," Ethan said simply. "Where's your wagon?" "Out front, but I'll see you home." It wasn't a question, and despite her protests about not needing charity, Ethan found himself riding alongside her wagon through the snow-covered valley toward a small homestead nestled against the foothills. The Kennedy place was modest but well-maintained. A sturdy cabin with smoke curling from the chimney, a small barn, and a corral where a few horses stamped in the snow. As they approached, 2 young boys, perhaps 8 and 10, ran out to meet them, followed by a teenage girl bundled against the cold. Ethan watched as Olivia embraced her siblings, their faces so similar to hers it was impossible to mistake them as anything but family. The sight stirred something uncomfortable in his chest, memories of his own family, long gone. "Who's he?" the older boy asked, eyeing Ethan suspiciously. "This is Mr. Rawlings," Olivia explained. "He was kind enough to escort me home." "Are you going to help us fight the bad men?" the younger boy asked with a directness only children possess. Before Ethan could respond, Olivia ushered her brothers inside, apologizing for their forwardness. "They've been frightened since our father died last spring. Those men, Harlow and his gang, they claim father borrowed money using our land as collateral, but it's not true. Why don't they just report them to the law?" Ethan asked, remaining on his horse. Olivia's bitter laugh told him all he needed to know. "The sheriff in Silver Creek? He's Harlow's cousin. Besides, they have papers, forged, but convincing enough." Ethan should have tipped his hat and ridden away. This wasn't his fight. Getting involved would only complicate his life and potentially get him killed. But as he looked at the small homestead and the 4 young people struggling to hold on to it, he found himself dismounting instead. "I can stay the night," he offered, "in case they come back." Relief and suspicion warred on Olivia's face. "Why would you do that?" Ethan couldn't answer the question for himself, let alone for her. "Consider it a Christian duty," he said finally, though he hadn't set foot in a church in years. That night, after a simple but filling stew prepared by Olivia and her sister Emma, 15, Ethan sat by the fire listening as Olivia explained their situation. Their father, a respected surveyor, had died of pneumonia, leaving Olivia to care for her siblings, Emma, Daniel, 10, and James, 8. They had a modest but profitable horse breeding operation, which had attracted Harlow's attention. "They want our water rights and passage," she explained. "Our land controls access to the high meadows, which would be valuable to anyone running cattle." Ethan nodded, understanding the economics of the situation. "And they're trying to scare you off." "They've done more than scare," Emma interjected, her young face solemn. "They poisoned one of our best mares last month. Shot at Daniel when he was checking the fence line." Olivia gave her sister a warning look, but didn't deny it. Instead, she said quietly, "I've been considering their offer to buy us out for a fraction of what the place is worth. At least we'd be alive." "And go where?" Ethan asked. "My aunt in Denver might take us in," she said, though her tone suggested it wasn't a welcome prospect. After the children were in bed, Ethan stepped outside to check the horses. The night was clear and cold, stars brilliant against the black sky. He was securing the barn door when he heard soft footsteps in the snow behind him. Olivia approached, wrapped in a shawl, her golden hair loose around her shoulders. In the moonlight, she looked ethereal, almost like a dream. "You didn't have to sleep in the barn," she said. "We could have made room in the house." "This is fine," he assured her. Then, unable to help himself, he added, "You've done well here, keeping everything together for your family." She looked surprised at the compliment, then smiled, a genuine expression that transformed her face and did strange things to Ethan's resolve. "We manage, but I'm afraid we're losing the fight." Without thinking, Ethan reached out to touch her shoulder. "Get some sleep, Miss Kennedy. I'll keep watch tonight." 3 days passed, and Ethan found reasons to delay his departure. He repaired fences, mended the barn roof, and helped Daniel with the horses, all while keeping a watchful eye on the property. Each night, he told himself he'd leave in the morning. Each morning, he found another task that needed his attention. On the 4th day, Harlow and his men returned, 5 strong this time. Ethan was in the corral when they rode up, and he placed himself between them and the house where Olivia was hanging laundry. "Thought you'd have moved on by now, Cowboy," Harlow called. "Not just yet," Ethan replied, his hand resting casually near his revolver. Harlow's eyes narrowed. "This ain't your fight." "Seems like it is now." The standoff might have turned violent then if not for the arrival of 3 riders from town. The shopkeeper Donovan and 2 other men Ethan recognized as local ranchers. "Everything all right here, Miss Kennedy?" Donovan called out. Olivia, who had moved to stand beside Ethan, called back. "Mr. Harlow was just leaving, I believe." Outnumbered now, Harlow gave a cold smile. "This ain't over. Not by a long shot." As they rode away, he called over his shoulder. "You got one more day to decide, Miss Kennedy. Then we do things the hard way." That evening, Olivia found Ethan in the barn, brushing down his horse. "You're leaving, aren't you?" she asked without preamble. He couldn't meet her eyes. "I should have been gone days ago. I'm due at the Crossfire Ranch." "Of course," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "You've been more than kind already." Ethan turned to face her, struck by how much he'd come to admire her in just a few days. Her strength, her devotion to her siblings, the way she carried burdens that would have crushed many men he'd known. "Come with me," he said suddenly. "All of you. At least until this blows over." Hope and doubt flashed across her face. "We can't just abandon our home. It's just a place, Olivia." It was the first time he'd used her first name. "You and your family are what matter." She stepped closer, her green eyes searching his face. "Why do you care what happens to us? You don't know us." It was a fair question, one Ethan had been asking himself. The truth was, in just a few days, this family had begun to fill a void he'd carried for years. Their struggle had become his own in ways he couldn't explain. "Maybe I'm tired of riding alone," he said finally. Before she could respond, shouting erupted from outside, Daniel's voice, high with panic. They rushed from the barn to find the boy pointing at the horizon where orange flames were visible against the night sky. "They've set fire to the north pasture," Daniel cried. The next hours were chaos as they battled the flames with wet blankets and shovels, eventually containing the fire before it reached the house, or barn. By dawn, they were exhausted, smoke-stained, and facing the grim reality that Harlow had escalated his threats. As they sat on the porch steps, watching the sunrise, Olivia looked defeated for the first time since Ethan had met her. "We can't fight them," she said quietly. "I was a fool to think we could." Ethan, his face streaked with soot, shook his head. "You weren't foolish to defend what's yours. It's not worth dying for," she whispered. "Not if it means my brothers and sister would be left alone." Something in her words struck Ethan deeply, the echo of his own loss, the memory of finding himself suddenly alone in the world after the attack that had taken his family. Without thinking, he reached for her hand. "No one's dying today," he promised. Later that morning, Ethan rode into town alone. He visited the telegraph office first, sending messages to contacts he hadn't spoken to in years. Then he visited the bank, the land office, and finally, the saloon where Harlow and his men were likely to be found. The place fell silent as he pushed through the batwing doors. Harlow and two of his men were at a corner table, playing cards. "Come to negotiate for the girl?" Harlow asked with a smirk. Ethan placed a folded document on the table. "Actually, I've come to buy you out." Confusion crossed Harlow's face as he unfolded the paper. A bill of sale for his own land claims, already processed by the Territorial Land Office. "What the hell is this?" "Those are your holdings to the east of Silver Creek," Ethan said calmly. "I've purchased them, along with your outstanding debts to the bank. As of this morning, you work for me, or you're bankrupt." The saloon had gone completely silent, everyone watching the confrontation. "You're bluffing," Harlow snarled, rising to his feet. "Ain't no ranch hand got that kind of money." "I wasn't always a ranch hand," Ethan said, his voice level. "My family owned one of the largest spreads in Wyoming territory before rustlers killed them. I've been tracking those men for 3 years. Turns out, 2 of them ride with you now." He nodded toward the men flanking Harlow, whose faces had drained of color. "Jenkins and Morrow. They were there the day my family died." Harlow glanced nervously at his companions. "I don't know nothing about that." "Maybe not," Ethan conceded. "Which is why I'm offering you a choice. Ride out of Montana territory by sundown, without Jenkins and Morrow, and you can start fresh somewhere else. Stay, and I'll have the U.S. Marshal waiting to arrest you for attempted murder, arson, fraud, and whatever else we can think of." "U.S. Marshal?" Harlow scoffed. "You're bluffing." "Marshal Davis is an old friend of my father's," Ethan said. "He'll be here by tomorrow. Your cousin the sheriff can't help you with federal charges." The standoff lasted another tense minute before Harlow threw down his cards. "This ain't over, Rawlings." "It is if you're smart," Ethan replied. "And Harlow, if you or anyone else comes near the Kennedy place again, they won't live to regret it." By the time Ethan returned to the homestead, the sun was low in the sky. He found Olivia on the porch, watching the road anxiously. "I was worried," she said as he dismounted. "I thought maybe." She stopped herself, embarrassed by her concern. "Harlow won't be troubling you anymore," Ethan said, climbing the steps to join her. Hope and disbelief warred on her face. "How can you be sure?" "Because I bought his debts and his land claims," Ethan explained. "He's leaving the territory." Olivia stared at him, stunned. "You? How could you afford such a thing?" Ethan leaned against the porch railing. "My family had money, a lot of it. After they were killed, I walked away from everything, hunting the men responsible instead of taking care of what remained. It was easier to be a drifter with a vendetta than to face my grief. And now, Olivia asked softly. Now I'm thinking it might be time to stop drifting, he admitted. 2 of the men I've been hunting ride with Harlow. They'll face justice. The others? He shrugged. Maybe vengeance isn't worth sacrificing a life for. Olivia stepped closer, her green eyes searching his face. What changed your mind? Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and found he couldn't lie. You did. Your family. Seeing how you fight for each other, how you've made a home here despite everything. It reminded me of what matters. The next morning, Ethan prepared to leave. He'd done what he came to do. The Kennedys were safe, and he had no more excuses to stay. As he saddled his horse, Olivia approached, a determined set to her jaw. You don't have to go, she said without preamble. Ethan paused in his task. I've intruded long enough. That's not true, she countered. The children adore you. Emma says you're the only one who can make James laugh since father died. Daniel follows you everywhere. And I. She faltered, then squared her shoulders. I would like you to stay. The confession hung between them, fraught with meaning. Ethan turned to face her fully. Olivia, I'm not the settling kind. Aren't you? She challenged. You just bought land here. You've avenged your family. What's left for you on the road? It was a question Ethan had been avoiding for years. The truth was, without his vendetta, he had no purpose, no direction. The thought terrified him. I wouldn't know how to be part of a family anymore, he admitted quietly. Olivia took his hand, her touch warm and sure. None of us do, not really. We're all just figuring it out day by day. Before Ethan could respond, hoofbeats sounded from the road. They turned to see Harlow and his remaining men, 6 in all, riding hard toward the homestead, rifles drawn. Inside, Ethan ordered, pushing Olivia toward the house. Get the children to the cellar. The next moments were chaos. Ethan grabbing his Winchester, taking position behind the water trough as the first shots rang out. He heard Olivia shouting for her siblings, saw Emma pulling the boys toward the house. A bullet splintered the porch railing inches from Daniel's head. Ethan returned fire, dropping one of Harlow's men from his saddle. The others scattered, taking cover behind rocks and trees at the edge of the property. Harlow's voice carried across the yard. Come on out, Rawlings. Face me like a man. Another volley of shots peppered the water trough. Ethan was pinned down, outnumbered. He needed to reach the house where he'd have better cover, but doing so would expose him to fire. Suddenly, a shot rang out from the house. Olivia at an upstairs window with her father's old rifle. Her bullet caught another of Harlow's men in the shoulder, sending him reeling. The distraction gave Ethan the moment he needed. He sprinted for the porch, diving behind a stack of firewood as bullets kicked up dirt at his heels. From his new position, he had a clear shot at the tree line. The gunfight lasted less than 5 minutes, but it felt like hours. When it was over, 2 of Harlow's men lay dead, 3 more wounded. Harlow himself had taken a bullet to the leg but was still conscious, cursing as Ethan approached him, gun trained on his chest. You should have taken the deal and left, Ethan said coldly. Harlow spat blood. Couldn't let it lie. Not after you humiliated me. Behind Ethan, the front door opened, and Olivia emerged, rifle still in hand. She surveyed the scene with a pale but determined face. Is it over? Almost, Ethan replied, his eyes never leaving Harlow. Tie up the wounded ones. The marshal will want to question them when he arrives. Later, after the marshal and his deputies had taken Harlow and his surviving men into custody, Ethan found Olivia at the small family cemetery on the hill behind the house. She was kneeling beside her father's grave, removing weeds from around the simple wooden marker. The children are asleep, Ethan said quietly, not wanting to intrude on her grief. Olivia nodded without looking up. They're exhausted. It's been a difficult day. I'm sorry I brought this to your doorstep, he said, guilt weighing heavily on him. If I hadn't interfered, we would have lost our home, or worse, she interrupted, finally turning to face him. In the fading light, with her golden hair loose around her shoulders, she looked both vulnerable and incredibly strong. You saved us, Ethan. All of us. He knelt beside her, helping to clear the last of the weeds. Your father would be proud of how you've protected this family. A sad smile touched her lips. He always said the land was just dirt and trees. It was the people who made it a home. She hesitated, then added softly, "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about not knowing how to be part of a family anymore." Ethan waited, his heart beating faster than it had during the gunfight. "I think," she continued carefully, "that home isn't something you know how to make. It's something you choose to build, day by day, with the people who matter." The words struck Ethan deeply, echoing truths he'd been running from for years. Since losing his family, he'd convinced himself that attachments were dangerous, that caring for others only led to more pain. But watching Olivia with her siblings, seeing their love for each other despite their hardships, had begun to heal something broken inside him. "What are you saying, Olivia?" he asked, needing to hear it plainly. She met his gaze directly, courage in every line of her face. "Stay? Not just for a while, but stay. Help me raise these children. Help me make this place thrive again." The invitation hung between them, breathtaking in its simplicity and its enormity. "I'm asking a lot, I know," she continued when he didn't immediately respond. "You barely know us. But I've seen how you are with the children, how you fought for us. And I think we could build something good here. Together." In that moment, the last of Ethan's defenses crumbled. The vengeance that had driven him for years now seemed hollow compared to what Olivia was offering. A chance to be part of something real again, to build rather than destroy. "I'm not an easy man," he warned her. "I've been alone a long time." A smile touched her lips. "And I'm not an easy woman. But I think we might be good for each other, don't you?" Instead of answering with words, Ethan reached for her hand, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like the most significant choice he'd made in years, choosing connection over isolation, future over past. As the sun set behind the mountains, casting the valley in gold and shadow, Ethan Rawlings let himself imagine a life he'd never thought possible, a life with Olivia Kennedy and her family, on this land they would defend together. 6 months later, on a perfect summer day, Ethan and Olivia stood beneath an arch of wildflowers in the meadow behind the house. The entire town of Silver Creek had turned out for the wedding. Even Mr. Donovan had closed his store for the day. Emma, resplendent in a new blue dress, stood beside her sister as maid of honor. Daniel and James, uncomfortable but proud in their Sunday best, watched solemnly as Ethan promised to love, honor, and cherish their sister for all his days. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan kissed Olivia with a tenderness that belied his former hardness. The crowd cheered, children threw flower petals, and for the first time in many years, Ethan felt completely at peace. That evening, after the guests had departed and the children had finally gone to bed, Ethan and Olivia stood on the porch of what was now their home. The moonlight silvered the meadows and forests stretching before them, land that would pass to Daniel and James someday, a legacy preserved through courage and love. "Are you happy?" Olivia asked, nestled against his side. Ethan considered the question seriously. Happiness had been a foreign concept for so long that he'd almost forgotten how it felt. But here, with Olivia in his arms and her siblings sleeping safely inside, with a future stretching before them full of possibility rather than vengeance, he recognized it for what it was. "Yes," he said simply, tightening his arm around her waist. "For the first time in years, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." As they stood together watching the stars emerge in the vast Montana sky, Ethan marveled at how his life had changed in just a few short months. He had come to Silver Creek seeking temporary work, carrying the weight of his past like a burden. He was leaving that behind now, not forgetting, but moving forward, building a family, tending the land, creating a future worth fighting for. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, fences to mend, horses to train, children to raise. But tonight, holding Olivia close as the moon rose over their home, Ethan Rawlings knew he had finally found what he'd been searching for all along. Not vengeance, but redemption. Not isolation, but belonging. In the heart of the untamed West, they had found in each other not just survival, but the promise of a life filled with purpose and love.